They were the kind of family you waved to when you drove past their house. Polite, hardworking, and always smiling. But when officers stepped through the front door on that cold November morning, they froze in place. In all their years on the force, none of them had seen anything like it. What lay inside the Miller family home would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And it was only the beginning. November in Brooksville, Indiana, comes with a kind of stillness that city people can't quite comprehend. It's the kind of town where the rhythm of life is dictated by the harvest, church bells, and high school football games. The streets are wide, the air carries the faint smell of wood smoke in the evenings, and even the busiest part of town seems unhurried. It was here, in this seemingly safe and ordinary place, that the Miller family had built their life over 2 decades. David Miller, 48, was the sort of man who could be fixing your car one moment and delivering a bag of groceries to a struggling neighbor the next. He owned Miller Auto Repair, the only full-service garage for miles, and though the shop paid the bills, David's true reward came from helping people. Laura Miller, 45, had been the school librarian for more than 15 years. Students adored her. She remembered their birthdays, asked about their families, and somehow managed to know which book each child would fall in love with before they even opened it. They had 3 children. Emily, 17, was in her final year of high school, accepted into a nursing program and counting down the days until graduation. Caleb, 14, was quieter, more reserved, but when he was on the basketball court, he came alive. Sophie, just 10, was a bright, giggling whirlwind who loved art, animals, and curling up next to her mom during movie nights. The Miller home sat halfway down Willow Lane, a narrow cul-de-sac with well-kept lawns and mailboxes dressed up for the seasons. To neighbors like Mary Jensen, who had lived next door for 12 years, the Millers were the kind of family everyone wanted to be. Always together, always smiling, she would later recall. They had this way of making you feel better just by talking to you. You'd never think something bad could happen to them. But Brooksville wasn't without its shadows. 2 houses down from the Millers lived Ryan Cooper, a 29-year-old whose life had taken a very different path. Ryan had grown up in town but had never found steady footing. His adolescence was a string of school suspensions and petty thefts, and adulthood wasn't much better. He'd spent time in county jail for burglary, and even when he wasn't in trouble with the law, he was drifting from job to job, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. Years earlier, Ryan and David had been friendly. Ryan had worked at the garage for a short while, but things soured when tools started disappearing. David had let him go quietly to avoid making a scene, but it was the kind of dismissal Ryan nursed into a grudge. In recent months, Ryan's financial troubles had worsened. Rumor had it he had gone to David for money, and David had refused. No one knew what words had passed between them, but some believe it planted a dangerous seed. 2 days before the tragedy, Mary Jensen saw Ryan standing by the Miller's mailbox, pacing back and forth. It was odd enough for her to mention it to Laura later that day. Laura smiled it off, but admitted in a quieter voice, "I've just had this uneasy feeling lately." She didn't elaborate, and Mary didn't press. On the evening of November 16th, Emily posted a picture on Instagram. In it, she and her mother were in the kitchen, rolling out cookie dough, both laughing. Caleb sat in the background doing homework, while Sophie perched on a stool, licking batter from a spoon. It was the kind of wholesome image friends scrolled past without thinking twice, not knowing it would be the last photo Emily would ever post. At 10:15 p.m., a neighbor across the street thought they heard a dog barking, followed by a dull, heavy bang. They muted their television for a moment, but, hearing nothing else, turned the volume back up. In a town like Brooksville, you didn't imagine the worst. The next morning, at 7:42 a.m., the Brooksville police dispatcher took a call that would change everything. Mary Jensen's voice shook as she said, "There's blood. Oh God, there's blood everywhere. I think they're all dead." Officer Tom Reynolds was the first to respond. 14 years on the force had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing prepared him for what was inside the Miller home. The front door was ajar, a cold draft carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of iron. The living room was undisturbed except for a coffee mug shattered on the floor, as though it had been dropped mid-sip. Reynolds stepped into the hallway, his boots squelching against carpet saturated with something dark. David Miller was slumped against the wall near the kitchen doorway, his head bearing multiple blunt force injuries. Just beyond him, Laura lay on her side near the stove, one hand still curled around a wooden spoon. Upstairs, the scene was no less grim. Emily was found in her bedroom, signs of a struggle evident, books scattered, her desk chair overturned. Caleb lay in the room across the hall, a baseball trophy shattered beside his bed. Sophie's room was last. Reynolds paused before opening the door, but when he did, he found her small frame curled in the corner, eyes closed, as though she had fallen asleep. The bruising told a different story. As if talking or gesturing to the passenger. The smaller shape beside him never turned its head toward the road. Dispatch relayed the sighting to Detective Ruiz, who was already moving. She ordered them to keep eyes on the vehicle, but not to approach. Rural routes like this had few turnoffs, but they also offered plenty of places to vanish. She needed more units in position before they boxed him in. As they coordinated, Ruiz couldn't shake the image of that crayon drawing from Ryan's kitchen. Sophie's name in a child's uneven hand, her stick-figure family smiling under a yellow sun, and that thick, black scribble obliterating David's face. Was the passenger Sophie? And if so, how had she survived when everyone else was gone? While the marked units set up an intercept, Ruiz's partner, Detective Carl Hayes, was still combing Ryan's house for clues. In a bedroom closet, he'd found a duffel bag partially packed, clothes, a flashlight, several cans of food, and, buried beneath it all, a small revolver. It was loaded. There was also an envelope with faded handwriting. For Laura. Hayes didn't open it right away, logging it for evidence instead, but its existence deepened the mystery. Back on the rural road, Ryan suddenly put the truck in gear. The tires spat gravel, and the pickup lurched forward, heading north. The surveillance unit rolled out behind him at a safe distance. For the next 5 miles, nothing happened. Then, without warning, Ryan took a sharp right onto a narrow gravel track leading into a stand of woods. Ruiz's voice came sharp over the radio, "Do not lose visual." When the trailing unit followed, the trees closed in on either side, sunlight flickering through bare branches. The track ended abruptly in a small clearing littered with rusted farm equipment. Ryan's truck was there, engine still running. The driver's door hung open. Officers approached with weapons drawn, calling his name. No response. They checked the cab, empty. The passenger door stood ajar too, a single small sneaker lying in the dirt below it. In the cold quiet, one of the officers noticed a faint sound, not leaves, not wind. A whimper. It was coming from somewhere beyond the tree line. They moved toward it, stepping carefully over tangled roots, until they found a set of boot prints leading deeper in. 2 sizes, one large, one much smaller. Ruiz arrived minutes later, taking in the scene. The sneaker was small, pink-trimmed, with a faded cartoon character on the side. Sophie was known to wear shoes like that. The prints suggested she was walking with him, not being dragged. Was she a hostage? Or had something far more complicated happened in that house than anyone yet understood? A call from dispatch cut into her thoughts. Forensics at the Miller home had found fresh fingerprints on the back door, prints that did not match Ryan's. That meant either he had an accomplice, or someone else entirely had been inside that house before or after the murders. Somewhere in the woods ahead, a child and a man were on the move. And back in town, the crime scene had just given up a secret that threatened to unravel the working theory. What the investigators were about to discover next would turn the case on its head. The boot prints wound deeper into the woods, curving along a shallow creek bed. The ground was damp from overnight frost, making the impressions sharp and easy to follow. The smaller prints, presumably the child, showed a lighter step, close alongside the larger ones. Ruiz kept scanning the tree line, every sense on high alert. Ahead, a rustle broke the quiet. Her hand went to her holster, signaling the others to fan out. They advanced slowly until the trees opened into another clearing, this one littered with old hunting blinds and an abandoned shack whose roof sagged in the middle. The sound came again, a muffled noise from inside the shack. Ruiz moved first, pushing the door open with the barrel of her gun. Inside, the smell of damp wood and stale cigarettes hit hard. In the far corner, a small figure crouched, knees to chest, eyes wide. It was Sophie. She was pale, trembling, and wearing a sweater too big for her, sleeves bunched past her hands. But she didn't run toward them, she flinched back, glancing at the door as though expecting someone else to appear. "It's okay," Ruiz said softly, holstering her weapon. "You're safe now." Sophie's voice was barely audible. He said not to talk to anyone, or he'd come back. "Where's Ryan?" Ruiz asked. Her eyes darted toward the window. "Gone. He left when he heard cars." They escorted Sophie outside, but she resisted when they tried to lead her toward the patrol car. "No, we have to find the paper. He said it proves something about Daddy." Back at the command post, Sophie was wrapped in a blanket and given water. A child psychologist was brought in to begin a careful interview. Between pauses and hesitant glances, she revealed fragments. Ryan had come to the house the night before. She woke to shouting downstairs. Then there was a loud bang and red everywhere. He'd taken her out the back door, saying they had to leave because bad people would be coming. When asked who the bad people were, Sophie hesitated, then whispered a name that froze the room: "Uncle Jack." Detective Ruiz exchanged a look with Hayes. Jack Whitmore, Laura Miller's older brother, had a checkered history with the law. Mostly bar fights and DUIs, but he'd done a short stint in prison for assault back in the early 2000s. He'd been at the Miller home for Thanksgiving the year before, but otherwise kept his distance from family gatherings. As Sophie continued, she insisted Ryan wasn't trying to hurt me, that he was keeping me safe until we could show the paper. Ruiz had the psychologist step out briefly and pulled Hayes aside. "This changes everything," she said. "If she's telling the truth, we might have been chasing the wrong primary suspect." But even as she said it, Hayes shook his head. Or Ryan's feeding her a story to cover himself. "We can't take it at face value." While they debated, a forensics tech from the Miller home called in. The unidentified fingerprints on the back door matched a partial print from a police database. The name attached, Jack Whitmore. Ruiz felt the ground shift beneath the case. She'd expected Ryan to be the central figure. Now another suspect, one with blood ties to the family, was on the table. And Ryan, still missing, somewhere in the woods or beyond. The radio crackled again. A tip had just come in from a gas station 30 miles north. The attendant swore he'd seen Ryan Cooper less than an hour ago, and he wasn't alone. The man with him was older, heavier, with a graying beard. The description matched Jack Whitmore perfectly. If true, the two men were together. And if they were together, the motive, and the danger to anyone who crossed their path, had just doubled. The gas station attendant's voice on the line was steady but urgent. He'd been working the morning shift, the store nearly empty, when a blue pickup with rust spots along the fenders pulled up. He recognized Ryan immediately. Everyone in a 50-mile radius seemed to know him by face, if not by name. But it was the man with him that caught his attention. Older, graying beard, heavy set. They came inside together. Ryan bought coffee. The older man bought cigarettes. Neither spoke much, but when they did, their voices were low and quick. The attendant had seen the news alerts about the Miller murders and recognized the older man from the posted photo of persons of interest being circulated internally to local businesses. Jack Whitmore. By the time the attendant stepped into the back office to call it in, the truck was pulling out onto the highway heading west. Detective Ruiz ordered all units in the area to converge, setting up a rolling perimeter. If Ryan and Jack were together, this meant one of two things. Either Ryan had lied to Sophie and was part of something bigger, or Jack was the actual architect of the crime and Ryan had been roped in as muscle or a scapegoat. Ruiz and Hayes began digging into Jack Whitmore's past. Born and raised in Brooksville alongside Laura, Jack had always been the volatile one. Teachers remembered him as intelligent but easily provoked. He dropped out of high school in his junior year and bounced between odd jobs and trouble with the law. His relationship with David Miller had been cordial at first, but about 3 years back, there had been a blow-up. According to a police report from 2020, Jack had confronted David over what he claimed was family money owed to him. Laura had tried to mediate, but David stood his ground. The argument turned physical. Jack shoved David into a workbench at the garage. No charges were filed, but from that day, David kept Jack at arm's length. More troubling was Jack's financial state. Bank records showed he was nearly $20,000 in debt, with no steady income. 3 weeks before the murders, he'd been served an eviction notice. By mid-afternoon, a trooper spotted the blue pickup parked behind an abandoned diner off Route 46. Units surrounded quietly, weapons drawn. The building was boarded up except for a side door swinging loosely. Inside, The smell of mildew and dust was overpowering. Dried leaves scattered across the linoleum floor. In the kitchen area, they found evidence of a brief stop: 2 coffee cups, one still half full, and an ashtray with 3 cigarette butts. Fingerprints lifted from the cups later confirmed Ryan and Jack had been there within the last hour. Behind the diner, the ground sloped down to a drainage ditch. Fresh tire tracks led away toward a narrow service road. The pursuit was back on. Ruiz, now riding with the lead unit, stared at the map. This road snaked west, then north, ending at the state line. If they crossed, jurisdiction would change, and the trail could grow cold. The chase tightened as dusk fell, the winter light fading fast. Up ahead, the blue pickup came into view. An unmarked cruiser moved to flank it. But just as they closed in, Ryan swerved hard, cutting across a gravel shoulder and plunging down an embankment toward thick woods. The truck bounced violently, the bed rattling as it disappeared into the dark tree line. Officers followed on foot, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the undergrowth. Somewhere ahead, an engine coughed, sputtered, then went silent. The air was still except for the sound of boots crunching leaves. Then, a voice. Low, hurried, unmistakably Ryan's. They froze, listening. Another voice responded, deeper, sharper.
Jack.
The next moment, a single gunshot cracked through the woods. The gunshot echoed, then faded into a silence that felt heavier than the cold air. Ruiz and Hayes exchanged a glance and moved forward, weapons raised, following the faint smell of gunpowder. They came upon a small clearing where the truck sat crooked, its front wheel sunk in a shallow ditch. The driver's door was open. A thin trail of blood marked the ground beside it, leading toward a cluster of fallen logs. From behind the logs, they found Ryan, hunched and gripping his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. He froze when he saw them, his eyes darting toward the shadows to his left. "He's gone," he said through gritted teeth. Jack took the bag. "He's headed for the bridge." "What bag?" Ruiz pressed, keeping her weapon steady. "The one from the house. The one with the paper," Ryan spat. "It proves he set the whole thing up." Ryan was disarmed and cuffed, medics moving in to tend to his arm. But he wouldn't stop talking. Between curses, he claimed Jack had come to him 2 nights earlier with a plan: break into the Miller house, scare David into handing over what was his. Ryan swore he'd refused at first, but Jack had a hold on him, a debt, threats, maybe worse. According to Ryan, when things spiraled into violence, he panicked. Jack insisted they take Sophie, not to hurt her, but to control the narrative. Ryan claimed he'd hidden Sophie in the shack to keep her away from Jack, then circled back to meet him, only for police to close in. While Ryan was loaded into an ambulance, Ruiz redirected units toward the bridge, an old steel structure spanning a river at the state line. By the time they arrived, Jack's vehicle, a stolen sedan, was there, parked at an angle. The driver's door hung open, engine running. The bridge was empty. A search began along the riverbanks, the beams of flashlights stabbing through the dark. Then, a shout from one of the officers. A duffel bag was wedged under a section of the bridge's girders, partially hidden by ice and debris. Inside was a jumbled mess: clothes, cash, and a manila envelope marked in faded ink, "Last Will and Testament." The will was dated 5 years earlier and named Jack Whitmore as the sole beneficiary of Laura Miller's life insurance policy. But there was something else, a second unsealed envelope addressed to Laura, its contents water-stained but still legible. It was a letter from David Miller, written weeks before his death, apologizing for keeping the truth about Jack from her and warning that if anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. The pieces were starting to align, but one was still missing: Jack himself. Then, over the radio, a voice crackled, "We've got movement on the north bank. Possible match." The north bank was a treacherous slope, slick with ice. Officers moved carefully, spreading out to cut off any escape routes. Ruiz stayed close to the lead, her flashlight catching flashes of movement between the trees. When they closed in, the figure emerged into clearer view. Jack Whitmore, coat torn, boots caked in mud, was half limping along the bank, a pistol in his right hand. "Drop it, Jack," Ruiz called out. He froze, shoulders rising and falling with sharp breaths. "You don't understand," he shouted back. "It was mine. He stole it from me. Put the gun down and we'll talk." Louise said, edging closer. Jack's gaze flicked between her and the icy river below. For a moment, it seemed he might comply. Then, with a sudden motion, he flung the pistol toward the water and bolted. The chase was short but violent. Jack slipped on the ice, hitting the ground hard. Ruiz was on him in seconds, cuffs snapping into place. Back at headquarters, under interrogation, Jack's story spilled out in fragments. He insisted David had swindled him out of money left by their parents. Money Jack claimed was rightfully his. When pressed on the murders, he grew agitated, denying pulling the trigger but admitting to being there. Ryan's account painted Jack as the aggressor. Jack's painted Ryan as the executioner. Forensics would be needed to settle it, but one thing was clear: the crime had not been a simple act of rage. It was a calculated move, rooted in greed, resentment, and decades-old family fractures. Sophie's statement, though painful, added one final twist. On the night of the murders, she heard her mother say something she didn't understand: "He'll never find it." Sophie thought she meant money. Investigators now suspected there might be more hidden in the Miller house, something that had driven both men to kill. As Jack was led to a holding cell and Ryan to the hospital under guard, Ruiz stood in the dim light of the interrogation room, the envelope still in her hand. The will was one thing, but David's letter hinted at a deeper secret, one that hadn't yet surfaced, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Laura had hidden was still out there.